Welcome to This Explainer. Right off the bat, I want you to ask yourself a question. Why does literally every disparate culture on Earth share the exact same story of a world-ending flood? That's the central mystery we're unraveling today. We're pivoting from the inner world of the human mind to the deep, deep past of the planet itself. We're going to explore an event so massive it might have actually rewritten the entire timeline of human civilization. And look, we're not just talking about a handful of cultures that happened to live near the ocean. We are talking about Mesopotamia and India, China and Greece, the indigenous cultures of North and South America, Aboriginal Australia, the Pacific Islands. The list goes on. These are completely unconnected civilizations separated by vast oceans and literally thousands of years. Yet they independently tell the exact same narrative. And honestly, it's the specific details that demand our attention here. A divine warning, a boat, the preservation of animals, a mountain, a bird sent out to find land, and a tiny group of survivors forced to rebuild from absolutely nothing. Now, conventional wisdom has always just brushed this off as universal human psychology. The assumption is basically, well, floods are a natural hazard, so early agricultural societies just naturally invented stories about them. But that explanation completely fails to account for the precise structural consistency of these myths across utterly isolated populations. It doesn't explain the identical narrative beats repeating across oceans. So either this is some bizarre universal psychological archetype, or something actually happened. Okay. Let's dive into this. To answer that question, we need to pivot from mythology over to hard geology, because exactly 12,800 years ago, the planet experienced a catastrophic event, and it's recorded right there in the rock, the ice, and the sediment of every single continent on Earth. This brings us to what's known as the Younger Dryas. Greenland ice cores give us this continuous, highly detailed record of Earth's atmosphere. At the end of the last ice age, global temperatures were rising steadily. Then, abruptly, the warming just stopped. Within decades, which is essentially a single human lifetime, temperatures in the North Atlantic region plummeted by as much as 15 degrees Celsius. 15 degrees! Glaciers re-advanced, and this triggered a brutal 1,000-year winter that ended almost as abruptly as it began. At this precise geological moment, the biological record shows a massive vanishing act. 35 genera of large North American megafauna simply disappear. Mammoths, mastodons, dire wolves, short-faced bears, American camels, poof, gone. And simultaneously, the Clovis culture, which was the most widespread hunter-gatherer society in North America, vanishes from the archaeological record entirely. The people, the animals, the climate, they all change at exactly the same time. The cause of this sudden, violent, deep freeze has been one of the great mysteries of Earth science. For decades, the dominant theory was a massive influx of glacial meltwater that somehow disrupted ocean circulation. But the evidence for that specific meltwater pulse is heavily disputed. Then, in 2007, a team of 26 scientists led by Richard Firestone published a paper proposing a highly debated extraterrestrial answer. So, the crucial point is the physical evidence left behind. It's effectively a 12,800-year-old crime scene. Across North America, Europe, and the Middle East, geologists find what they call the black mat. It's this thin, dark, sedimentary layer sitting right at the geological boundary of the Younger Dryas onset. Below this layer, you find Clovis artifacts and mammoth bones. Above it, absolute biological silence. Now, what's really interesting here is the chemical composition of that black mat layer. We see elevated concentrations of iridium. That's a platinum group element that's super rare in Earth's crust but very common in meteorites. It's actually the exact same marker that helped identify the dinosaur extinction asteroid. We also find magnetic spherules, tiny iron-rich droplets formed by rapid cooling under extreme heat. We even find high silica melt glass at Abu Huraira in Syria, one of the world's earliest agricultural settlements, which formed at temperatures exceeding 2,200 degrees Celsius. And finally, nanodiamonds. These are microscopic crystals that are only formed under extreme impact pressure. Now, we must be absolutely clear here. This is a live, ongoing scientific debate. The Younger Dryas Impact Hypothesis faces genuine academic pushback. Critics point out that magnetic spherules could be produced by intense volcanic activity or just ordinary wildfires. The nanodiamond evidence requires extremely complex electron microscopy, and replication of those results has been contested. Furthermore, there is no single unified crater of the appropriate scale. So we are looking at two sides of a rigorous scientific dispute, balancing the extraterrestrial evidence against terrestrial explanations. To explain that lack of a giant crater and the widespread distribution of these impact markers, supporters of the hypothesis suggest a fragmented comet mechanism. Think back to the Shoemaker-Levy 9 comet.
Remember how it broke apart and struck Jupiter in multiple pieces back in 1994? Well, the theory proposes that a fragmented comet struck the Earth, triggering multiple massive air bursts across the Laurentide ice sheet. This would cause an impact winter, massive wildfires, and an enormous meltwater release into the oceans, all without leaving one conventional single crater.
Let's move on and see how this builds because it fundamentally transforms our understanding of the human timeline. We're shifting our focus now from geological destruction to the astonishing human response that immediately followed this period of total chaos. Within centuries of the Younger Dryas ending, hunter-gatherers in southeastern Turkey constructed Göbekli Tepe. This is a monumental temple complex featuring massive limestone pillars up to 6 meters tall, and it was built 11,500 years ago. That is centuries before the invention of agriculture or settled cities. It required immense coordination and stone-cutting techniques that completely challenge our conventional historical timelines. If the impact hypothesis holds true, Göbekli Tepe is the ultimate survivor's monument, built by the direct descendants of those who lived through the climate collapse. Adding to the intrigue is Pillar 43 at Göbekli Tepe. There's a contested but peer-reviewed theory, notably proposed by researcher Martin Sweatman, suggesting that the complex animal carvings on the specific pillar act as an astronomical record. The theory argues that these carvings encode a precession-based stellar date that corresponds almost exactly to the Younger Dryas event. And this brilliantly illustrates the connection back to our primary mystery. If a fragmented comet struck the North American ice sheet, it would have rapidly melted absolutely massive amounts of ice, leading to catastrophic, sudden sea level rise. Coastlines and low-lying plains, which, by the way, is where the vast majority of humans lived, would have flooded within a single lifetime. If that's true, these flood stories we talked about earlier, they aren't just cultural allegories, they're eyewitness accounts. The idea that oral traditions can accurately preserve complex information across thousands of years isn't just speculation either. In 2016, researchers verified that Australian Aboriginal oral traditions accurately describe specific coastal flooding events dating back up to 18,000 years. Think about that. If Aboriginal traditions can map geography across 18 millennia, it is entirely scientifically sound to consider that the shared flood narratives written down in the Epic of Gilgamesh by 2100 BC and preserved orally everywhere else encode a literal shared historical trauma. Honestly, regardless of where you land on the comet debate, the timeline is undeniable. A sudden, massive climate crash, a global megafauna extinction, the vanishing of the Clovis culture, and the origin point of universal flood myths. They all converge at the exact same geological moment. Our ancestors did not treat these stories as fiction. To them, this was an essential survival skill. The knowledge was preserved and passed down faithfully, generation by generation, for over 100 generations. They had nothing left but their knowledge and their stories, and they made absolutely certain that we would inherit them. This explainer gives us the geological foundation. In our next session, we're going to go inside the stories themselves. We'll lay out the specific cross-cultural parallels of these global flood myths side by side to examine precisely what they tell us about the human experience of this event. But I want to leave you with a final thought to sit with today. We now have modern planetary defense mechanisms, right? Things like NASA's DART mission to deflect cosmic threats. But 12,800 years ago, survivors of a global catastrophe relied on carved stone pillars and the human voice to transmit a warning across millennia. If our ancestors so carefully encoded their near extinction to ensure we never forgot, what planet-altering threats are we failing to record for the generations to come? Think about that for a bit. See you in the next explainer.